All right, hello and welcome. I'm Michael Fountain, Head of Product here at Apptentive.
I'm Sina Yeganeh. I'm a Director of Product Management here.
And today we're going to talk about how product research teams can work together to capture the voice of the customer, or VoC. We're very excited to bring this to you today. But before we start, here's a few housekeeping notes. If you have anything to ask about the topics covered today or about VoC, customer communication tips in general, please don't hesitate to submit your questions in the open-ended Q&A field in Zoom, the Zoom window. You should be able to see that Q&A button towards the center bottom of your screen. Use that to ask us any question during the webinar because we save quite a bit of time to answer your questions, and we really do want to hear from you.
Yeah, we are a feedback company, so we do love hearing questions and being able to chat. So please don't be shy and add any questions you may think of.
Absolutely, and do leave your name as well when you're entering your questions, just in case we don't get to it and we can respond back to you in person. So lastly, as we get started, you can engage with us and the panelists on Twitter using the hashtag VOCwebinar, which you'll see throughout the footer of the slides, or by following us, the Apptentive handle to see our live tweets. Hope to see you there as well. We'll be sharing links to everything that you see here, resources covered in the deck today via email after the webinar is concluded. All right, so let's kick this off, Sina.
All right, let's do it.
So when we look at Apptentive, our vision is a voice for every customer. And I just want to say, if you're an Apptentive customer, thanks for joining. And if you're new here, welcome. Let's get to know each other. And when we talk about a voice for every customer, this is why understanding and unlocking the VoC is very important to us, and that's why we're here today. And to kind of really state how important this is to us, we strongly believe that customers must be able to give feedback easily. And brands must be paying attention and be able to consume that feedback and really understanding why. This is where the customer can feel responded to and acknowledge that their voice is being heard. And ultimately means that the customer's feedback is valued and acted upon. And when this is done well, our VoC solution really measures the shifts in sentiment from customer experience to win back consumers and activate fans. So this is kind of the primer of Apptentive. And to date, we've powered millions of consumer interactions on billions of mobile devices for hundreds of brands worldwide. So if we don't see your brand up here, we definitely want to. So now that we've kind of set the scene, let's go ahead and jump into the meat of the webinar.
Yeah, so let's first start off with our agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about who owns the voice of the customer, what is a discovery guide, and how do you become one. And then finally, after you understand who owns it, how to become a discovery guide, and finally, we want to talk a little bit about how you actually use the voice of the customer, and then we'll open up for some Q&A. So the first question is, who owns the VoC? Now, this is a question that, I don't know, Michael, and a couple of different companies, different people have different answers.
Claim to ownership.
Yes, bigger companies, there's researchers, a lot of smaller companies, the CEO or the product manager, they all think that they own the VoC. And the reason why this topic came up for us, I think internally, is because me and you had the chance to actually go to Mind the Product, which is a great product conference. And Trisha Wang gave a great talk that we talked about internally here right afterwards. And she had a great quote, which was, in theory, we have user-centered design, but in practice, we have me-centered design. So, I mean, there are a lot of people within a company who thinks that they own VoC. And to kind of illustrate this point, I think we're just going to go through all the different personas and perspectives, because it's actually kind of important to empathize and understand why people think that they own the VoC. And don't worry, there's going to be an answer at the end of this too. So First off, sales and marketing. They believe that since they are meeting with prospects, meeting with customers, being kind of the front line, they're promoting the business and the mission. They're going to talks, they're going to conferences. They're meeting all these customers. They think that they own the VoC because they're sitting close to next to all the customers. Mm-hmm. That makes sense. But actually, no, that's wrong. They don't own the voice of the customer. The next group of people that we like to talk about is customer success. They are empathetic and they listen to the customer pain points. They engage with them constantly, and they really care. They're really passionate about what they do, and that makes sense, right? They talk with the customer, but actually they're also not the voice of the customer, right? Now we go into designers or researchers, which are indicated on this slide as scientists. And they are also extremely passionate about the experience and understanding the journey. They're often looked to be the expert on customer voice. I mean, their title is researcher, right? But unfortunately, they're also not the voice of the customer. And then finally, product with their cool headphones on. The joke here is that I always usually have my headphones on at work, or at least around my neck. But they care about the customer point. They actually talk with all of the other personas that we were talking about. They kind of gather all the feedback. They talk to the customer just like the researcher does and the designers. And they definitely think that they own the voice of the customer, but ... they don't either. So the answer, if you have been following and noticing that almost every persona internally does not own the voice of the customer, who does own the voice of the customer? Turns out that it's the customer who owns the voice of the customer. Yeah, drum roll, please. But I'm sure that a lot of you already knew that, but it's really important to kind of go through each of the different personas because everyone has a reason for believing why they own the voice of the customer. And it's kind of important because it's not bad that people want to get in front of their customer. No, we actually encourage that. And so the big action that we want to take away from this first thing is the customer owns the voice of the customer, but every one of your peers and every one of the stakeholders actually interacts and talks with these customers. And so there's tension that kind of exists as everyone kind of gets a different viewpoint. Hey, this customer said this, or this customer said that, right? And so the thing that's really important is being able to share that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through this webinar. So the tension really exists because everyone kind of feels like they should be the arbitrator, right? But everyone is actually also working towards the same goal, which is to create, to listen and create a customer-centric product.
Right. Not a me-centric product, a customer-centric.
Right, exactly. So you said it perfectly, me-centric. I mean, even I'm guilty of this, which is, I think it would be really cool if this happened. Right. But as long as I don't validate with the customer, it doesn't really matter, right? If I think something, because I might have very different interests. And then, so my thing that I like to say is to make the time build the trust. People who are engaging with customers frequently, it's important as product managers or as anyone to kind of just make sure that you are building trust with everyone across the organization and being able to hear different types of feedback. For example, sales might have a different perspective on the customer versus customer success versus the researchers. And if everyone talks to the customer, knowledge about the customer voice will be shared across the company. And that's key.
Yeah, and so it's like, thinking through this, obviously the researcher is the person that has the background, but everybody's talking to the customer. And so if everybody is talking to the customer, what's the role of the researcher? And I think that's what we'll dive into next here.
Yeah.
So when we look at, the landscape of let's call this user research methods, but it's not user, it's people, right? So when we really think about all of the research methods that are on the screen kind of gives me a headache, but let's...
There's a lot, right?
There's a lot on here, but we often hear there's tension between product managers and researchers, especially when there's a research org that's well established. And that's not a bad thing, but knowing which of the research methods to collect and to inform decision-making is often second nature to career researchers, right? They've been doing it for the longest, typically have the background in it, it's a lot of the education, a lot of the trials and tribulations, if you will. But to be honest with ourselves, there's a lot of research method overlap on the screen. And so, like I said, this gives me a headache. So let's like simplify it a little bit more. And we can really look at this along a couple of dimensions. And when we break this down into like observing what people do, so we're watching their behavior, and we're gathering that implicit feedback, which is behavioral data, and a lot of times at Apptentive we call this the what data internally, and we hear this discussed externally as well. But aside from the what data, it's like listening to what people say. So we're asking them, we're asking for explicit feedback, first-party data. And this is where they're self-reporting, what their beliefs and likes and dislikes are. So attitudinal data, sometimes emotional data, but we call this the why data. So what people do, the what data, what people say, the why data. But we can go one step further and focus research efforts to hear more stories about which will help us better understand, why and how to fix certain things. So more on the qualitative side. And as you can see, opposite of that, focus more on the numbers so we can get the quantitative side and how many, how much, and understand the impact of some of these. So when you're looking at researching users, really just understanding that these are people on the other side, right? They're doing certain actions, it's what they're doing, or they have certain feelings, and you're asking them about that. Obviously, this is very simplistic, and it's, from the prior side, you can tell there are definitely a lot of variations. But the point is there's really no one size fits all research methodology that really satisfies every situation. Right? And researchers are usually the expert here, but if empowered, which is what we're talking about, you can provide a lot more value enabling everyone in the company to collect and hear the voice of the customer. So we're talking about empowering the researcher, or in absence of researcher, empowering the product manager to kind of be that discovery guide. And this is where the researchers or the product managers can go from methodology gurus or experts, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but leveraging that and becoming the discovery guide within the organization. So what is the discovery guide? And this is where I kind of wanted to pause for some dramatic Jeopardy music, but then I realized you have to start with the answer first and then the question.
Yes, you did the order opposite.
Totally would not have worked here, but I was like, dramatic, oh wait, that's not gonna work. But so, what is the discovery guide? In your opinion, what's a discovery guide?
Well, I obviously, again, know the answer because we've gone through these slides, but I think a discovery guide, the way that it sounds, I think is great because it kind of, if you go to your company, say we're trying to train discovery guys, really at the end of the day, it's simply a facilitator, right. Correct? And so it's simply just making sure that it really reminds me of something that we're going to be talking about later. Yeah. But essentially that's servant leadership. So being able to guide people into understanding how to discover things.
Yeah, I think like whether you're a PM solo with no researcher or the researcher in a larger organization, your goal is to help other groups, as you said, right? Facilitate that, to answer the right question, get the right feedback. So knowing how to collect the voice of the customer, asking the right questions, at the right time, to the right audiences, using the right methods, which sounds simple enough, and Apptentive does help facilitate that when you're using Apptentive, but this is more of a mindset than a collection of tools. We're just one piece of that toolkit, if you will. And so to give us a frame of reference, which you alluded to, there's already a facilitator that's pretty well established in most tech companies, which is the role of the Scrum Master. And Discovery Guide is very similar to the Scrum Master, which I'm assuming most product managers and researchers are used to. But they're typically sit between product engineering and design and perform one or more of the roles that you see here on this. I love this slide, it's a fun little slide. At Apptentive, Scrum Master is a designated role on a Scrum team, but I've seen at other companies where it's actually a job title, right? will actually hire Scrum Masters. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about a discovery job guide as a job title. It's not expected to be all of these things, but it's really just a framework to think about the various roles the discovery guide could play within your organization. And so if we look at just a few of these, specifically, as a facilitator, like we said, you're going to facilitate the research best practices across the organization. And at times you may need to be the coach, where you need to help others either rally behind gathering feedback, making sure it's unbiased, and just being there to support the team. And this also means some folks you may have to teach, right? Teaching them what are the right questions to ask and what are the different ways to ask those questions so you're getting the right answers to answer the right ultimate questions.
Yeah, in a previous webinar that we did where we talked a little bit about the methodologies of gathering feedback, that teacher and coach is really just kind of that, where there is a way for you to ask unbiased feedback. There is a way for you to make sure that you're observing. And I think a lot of takeaways is that there's a lot of different ways to ask questions. And I think a discovery guide as a servant leader is also just helping others train those skills to actually gather effective feedback. Mm-hmm. So I think that that's really cool. And again, I love this analogy between the discovery guide and the Scrum Master, because a true Scrum Master is really just a coach, teacher, servant leader, someone who helps everyone else hone and train those skills. And so I really like this analogy as well.
Right, and as you do this, as you serve your team, you become the mentor. You become the person that's the trusted expert that people look up to, that they go to, they bring into meetings to help educate and train and support others. So this is a good way to think about it. But when we look at taking action from this and becoming the discovery guide, ultimately, your goal is to help others gather feedback correctly, right? We have a prior webinar that went really deep into this subject itself, so we can absolutely make sure that we share that out as well. But this doesn't mean that you have to do it for them, right? That's what the coach and the teacher is for. You're not there to do all of their work for them. And then really it's a matter of just showing them the way. And when you show them the way, you will share what you know. You can become the coach when the team needs to rally. You can be the teacher when the team needs training, and you can be the mentor when the team looks up for guidance and support. And you may be asking yourself, wow, that's kind of like a lot of stuff. Why the heck would I do this? Why would I sign up for more? It's actually, when you look at the thinking through this, when you do this correctly, you really are going to create more space for research, right? And you're going to do that because more people are engaged, which means you're making room to discover more data. And as you discover more data, you're absolutely going to add more of that research to your products. And this is where I think like the marriage of product manager and a researcher, captain, co-captain, partner in crime, whatever, is really when all of this comes together. Because no matter where the product lifecycle is at your organization, you can really bring in this research mindset, right? The servant leader mindset, the discovery guide mindset. And when everybody's rallied together, you will collect more information to help you make better decisions, hopefully better product decisions in the process. Yep. And we actually have a pretty good example. I was talking with our sales team the other day, and they were sharing an example of a customer talking about basically, I'll just read it for you real quick because it's actually pretty easy to run through. So we had a senior PM at one of our top 5 retailers who was facing, I'll laugh at this, a HIPAA situation. And I was like, well, what are you talking about, a HIPAA? What is this? What do you mean? Basically, highest paid person's opinion in the room, right?
It's a great acronym.
It is a great acronym. So basically, they were talking about the strategic direction of omni-channel deployment their mobile app in the retail environment. And so this was kind of the scenario that this PM was faced with, and through understanding what the right questions to ask, when to ask them. This was an hour-long meeting, by the way, and they're debating what's most important for the customer. What does the customer want? And remember, it's the customer owns their voice.
Right.
And so this PM said, okay, well, I'm going to use the tools at hand, which happened to be Apptentive. And so he deployed a survey, and that survey didn't just get tens or hundreds, it got thousands of results within that hour. And they were able to distill down what the customer preferred the experience be. And granted, this is just one example, but it's like the right time, the right place, the right questions to help inform the decision makers that are around the room. And this can happen in a boardroom meeting. This can happen in a sales call meeting. I mean, there's just a lot of opportunity for this type of research to be done. And this PM knew the right method to use, right?
And so was that able to convince the HIPAA that was the right direction?
It did. So
pretty cool.
I think it's a great example, and this came from the PM, obviously, but the researcher can help facilitate this.
Yeah.
And making sure that the right tools are there to gather this type of voice of the customer to make decisions.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you want to help others because by helping others, you're actually helping yourself. It's kind of the same concept again as the Scrum Master, which is as empowering the team to kind of get on the same page. That first action that we had, which is building the trust, becomes a lot easier because the culture of the entire company starts thinking about how to create more space, how to really analyze that data, and how to do it right. So I guess now that you know how to become a discovery guide, or how to help facilitate becoming a discovery guide, the real question is, how do you actually use VoC, right? And the answer for me on this is literally just in all communication, right?
Yeah.
So what you want to do is just be able to build that culture at the company that you're working at, or just anywhere, honestly, where you are actually transparent and talking, presenting your findings often with everyone. One of our key values here at Apptentive is be transparent.
Right.
And that means both, within internal stuff, but also means just being transparent with everything that you've learned. And so everyone can kind of grow. And I think that this is really cool. There are a lot of different ways that you can kind of share this kind of information. And so using the customer's own words is one of the most important in my book. One of the reasons being is that it can be extremely biased. If you start analyzing it without actually sharing the source,
Right.
You can have a completely different perspective than what was actually intended by the customer. By actually having the real words themselves, everyone can kind of, I think it means this, and you can go deeper with the customer too. So here at Apptentive, for example, when we had like a board meeting even, we have literally a slide of a couple of choice quotes that we felt made us understand the customer a lot better, which I think is really cool. As I mentioned, we have a previous webinar where we talk about how we do interviews and how we do gathering feedback.
Right.
One of the big things I want to reiterate here is to avoid interview bias, right? There are times where you can slap a prototype in front of someone and you're trying to test whether they're going to click the button or not, and you say, hey, so do you notice anything new? And there's like a big red button in the middle, where you're kind of leading them towards the discussion, right? So making sure that you're actually like listening, observing, and reporting accurately is really important. And I think that as a discovery guide, you definitely want to make sure that you have these tools in your belt to be able to educate as well. The thing that's funny here also is that the thing that works the most for me when I do customer interviews is actually just not the actual questions that I'm actually asking, but actually seeing how they interact with our site. So one of the things that I like to do is, can you show me what you're talking about? And actually seeing them log into our site and then take an extra click to get to where they need to go or whatnot. All of those are really important pieces of feedback. And those are these are your tools that you can use to kind of actually get implicit feedback from what the customer is doing and observing. And so, I think that to reiterate, I think there's a lot of different ways to do interviews. Being able to share that knowledge to make sure that everyone is actually conducting interviews without bias and being able to take all the tools like observing is really important. And then finally, in terms of actually presenting your findings, we use multiple different channels of communication. So Slack is one example, email, all hands. So for Slack, we have a customer feedback Slack channel where we literally put customer feedback. We have an email that we have a weekly email that we send out. And in that weekly email, we talk about the customer feedback.
Right.
In our all hands meetings, we just had our product meeting yesterday. We share customer feedback. And the idea is that you have this culture of just continuously sharing these findings, and then it won't ever become weird to call yourself a discovery guide in front of your peers, because it's kind of just natural. Everyone cares. Everyone wants to care about the customer feedback, and there's less of that tension, right? Like
there is, and I think there's less tension when it becomes second nature that you start to see this feedback. And a few of the other things that we do with the wall of quotes that we just started, but it's starting to grow. And so we're taking feedback from either customer success or feedback from sales, or even our AMs when they're talking with customers on site. And we're taking that feedback, printing it up, putting it on the wall of quotes. It's in our engineering section, so the engineers get a chance to see the feedback as well, which is really empowering to see, like, I built this and it affected our customer in this way. And that's when the voice of the customer can really, really shine, and you have the empathy throughout the entire organizational stack, if you will. And so everybody knows that everything they're doing affects the customer.
Yeah,
it's people, not users.
It feels good when, so it's actually a physical board that's right next to my desk, which makes me happy, of actual printed out quotes. And it feels good when you hear the printer whirring, because we don't use the printer very often, and near the engineering area, and someone grabs a sheet of paper and you watch them walk towards that wall. So it is a team building thing. And again, it's just important that you build this culture. And then at that point, everyone's on the same team, everyone's using the same methodologies, and you're gathering really good feedback, really good, useful feedback.
Right.
So to summarize everything that we've talked about here today, no one owns the VoC, right? It's the customer that owns the VoC.
Yep.
How you harness that power is really the next step to that. And so everyone's gathering this information in order to make sure that everyone understands and works together well. You have to make the time to build the trust. And so that means making sure that you talk with all the different departments and make sure that they all understand, hey, we're all on the same team here. We're gathering different pieces of information, and that information will ultimately help us make the best decision for the customer. So then we talked a little bit about the discovery guide and how to become one of your organization. And that means that you're a servant leader that is also coaching, teaching, mentoring, helping others to be really good at gathering good feedback. And then finally, once you get information, don't be scared to share it around your company, and make sure that, if you've made the time to build the trust, everyone would be excited to hear the different findings that you have.
I guess
Cool. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. That is actually the end of our presentation, but we still have Q&A, which is pretty exciting for us because we like to answer questions.
We're definitely looking forward to that.
So we're going to go ahead and pull up the questions here.
So just as a quick reminder, we will be sharing the recordings and the slides. And in case there's anything you'd like for us to circle back on, but feel free to submit more questions as we're talking through this. We're looking through some of them now as we come in getting queued up. So we're going to jump right into this. But lastly, don't forget Twitter using VoC hashtag, or the hashtag VoC webinar on our @Apptentive accounts live tweets. So
cool. So the first question is qualitative or quantitative feedback more important?
Yes.
Yes. I couldn't have said it better myself. So yes, both of them are very important. I don't think you could say one is more important than the other. It really depends on the circumstance, right? And so sometimes it depends on what kind of metric you're going for, what kind of goal you're trying to set. But I think that in all cases, both of them are important to gather, because only one of them paints one side of the story. You can't really paint the entire picture without both sides of the story. And then if you're doing kind of a smaller scale thing, it's easier to do qualitative feedback. You can actually interview each of the customers If you're doing kind of a bigger thing like an A/B test, quantitative is something that you can do a little bit easier. But my whole stance on this is that it's important to do both, regardless. Even if you have a million customers who are using something, making sure that you also do some qualitative feedback is probably a good gut check to make sure that the methodology of the questions you're asking on the quantitative actually makes sense.
Yeah, I've got a good example of this. We have a customer that is, let's say, in the coffee space. And she has, well, they do a lot of A/B testing, right? And we integrate with a couple A/B providers. And so that gives you the quantitative data, but then she follows up with those, whether they're on the path A or path B, to get the qualitative. Why did you go this direction? Why? So you have the qual and the quant really working hand in hand together. And when you think about it like that, that's where there's overlap. But this is good overlap. This is where you actually you can really understand how many people went in one direction, but really start to then dig into why did they make that choice?
Yeah.
And that can help inform future decisions. So yes is the answer to that ultimately, but strategically and how to do it.
You just have to think about what you're looking for, and both still matter, right?
Yeah.
So the next question, how do I hear from more of my customers? Right. So there's the easy question, or the easy answer, I feel like we always have one of these, is just engage with them more often, right? And so that means whether you use tools to be able to reach out and communicate with them, or just meeting them in person or emailing them, etc. And just making sure that you engage with them at the right time is a really important thing. We're lucky here at Apptentive that a lot of our customers love us. And so it's really easy to actually hear from them, because we have a fantastic account management, customer support team that is reaching out to these customers. And if product wants to talk to them, we have those tools in place, and they're excited to talk with us. You'd be surprised, even at companies that I've worked at where we don't have that structure in place, you'd be surprised how easy and how much people want to be listened to. Right. And so just give it a chance and see if you can reach out to them. You can engage with them on a multitude of different ways, using surveys, using dialogues to kind of start the conversation, email, etc., in-person conferences. It's all really up to you, I feel like.
And one example of this, I was doing some research on one of our integrations that we're looking at going forward. And so talking with sales reps, like, when you hear this integration come up, ask these 2 or 3 questions. And so we're getting basically allowing them to field additional questions, but they're not driving. We're not trying to get biased questions or biased answers, but we're trying to say, oh, help us understand how you want to use that, or how would you use this? And those little questions circle back into product. And right now they're going through Salesforce to us, but that's fine. It's like, oh, we can run a report on this. And now we have a selection of customers or even prospects that we can reach out to engage with. And so you have to be proactive. The voice of the customer is not a reactive activity. You really do need to be proactive to go out there and make sure you're listening to the right customer at the right time.
Yep. And making sure it's easy too, because nothing is more annoying than when you're, about to hit checkout and then a big 45-minute survey comes up. I actually just yesterday, I'm sorry, I have to bring this up. Just yesterday, I went to Chick-fil-A, and yeah, I like Chick-fil-A too. And I ordered something and it took forever to get to me. The fries were cold, and that's the worst. You never want fries to be cold. Long story short, I tried to give them feedback, but I had to answer, I felt like almost a SAT type questionnaire before I was able to even get any sort of response, or, all I wanted to say, hey, the food was late, the food was cold, I want to let you know. But then it was like, which store are you at? I'm like, you can tell which store I'm at. I just gave you the receipt. Yeah, I know, it was a pain. And so really the biggest thing that makes me want to not engage with someone is not making it easy for me. So, so please do make it easy for your customers to talk to you.
Yes.
The next one is, what are the most important VoC metrics?
Most important VoC metrics.
There's a couple things here, right? I think there's a lot of soft metrics that I kind of gleaned from both going to mine the product and our internal discussions, which is making sure that every part of our organization, we already know they care about the customer.
Right.
We're a customer-centric
Right.
company that's trying to help others become customer-centric, through feedback. But the next step is making sure that those learnings are shared across. And so the three that come to mind for me are making sure that everyone within the company is able to ask and feel comfortable talking to the customer. Being able to share that across the entire company. And then number three, educating ourselves to get better at gathering feedback.
Yeah, so with that, I mean, if you wanted to create a dashboard, if you will, of the number of touches that we've had, the number of quotes that we've received, and the number of conversations that have been engaged with, that's one way to look at it. I think if you're using tooling, though, for voice of the customer, then you're on more the numbers side of it. So you're asking more of how many or how much interacted with, and so then you have interaction rates, response rates for surveys, and all of those are all valid ways to measure the effectiveness of your voice of customer, but you actually have to do it in order to get those metrics and make those metrics valuable to you.
Cool. Next question is, in a B2B world where you have a few clients, how do you avoid the HIPAA, which is, I guess, a variant of HIPAA, which is highest paying client opinion? I love these analogies. These acronyms are amazing. Well, that is, you are stepping on one of the more challenging parts of a product that I faced probably my entire career, which is you have someone who's paying you a lot of money to do something,
right?
And they have a strong opinion. I have plenty of times, especially in consulting, there's a lot of times where there is just someone who's coming in with a lot of opinion. And I would say the number one thing is by empowering yourself to becoming the discovery guide, by empowering yourself to getting good feedback, you're doing the best you possibly can to give them all the data that allows them to make the right decision, right? And so I think Michael's example was very poignant about the HIPAA, which was essentially he did a quick survey using Apptentive. He got thousands of responses within seconds, and it was able to kind of change.
It wasn't within seconds, but it was like within a short period of time.
Yeah.
Within the meeting space, which I think is like 30 minutes to an hour.
Yeah, I mean, still, my point is that it's almost instantaneous, right? That you get this feedback, and for the same type of thing, at the end of the day, if you're, I don't know your specific situation, but if you're directly working with a client who's paying you X amount of money, the best thing that you could possibly do is just show them with data, different types of data, because different people actually react differently to different things, and present that information. That's kind of the best way to do that. One of the other things is, and I think we briefly touched upon this, is by teaching even the people who are your clients how you're gathering feedback, it gives them the empathy to understand why this matters. You can actually kind of tease out which type of questions or which type of interview style that actually matters to them, for them to actually have an opinion, right? I found that some people have no value in customer feedback, but really care about A/B testing, right? There's actually a big sense, a sense of A/B testing is the right way to go. And if it's not A/B tested, then who cares, right? In that case, I would do the A/B testing for them, but I'd also think about the other ways of gathering feedback and kind of interjecting those things, so that way they get the empathy and they understand your perspective.
Yeah, I think you hit on the right thing, which is it is about the end consumer in this case is empathy. You're building something for them. Yeah. So while you're being paid by the brand essentially to build something for their customer, the end consumer, you have to be able to reach through the brand to interview or at least understand those personas, so that you can have those types of questions or demos, or if you already have a product out there, you can do the testing or you can do the surveying in app. So those are like variations of the same thing. And it really just depends on where you are in that life cycle to what research method you have access to.
Yep. And ultimately, at the end of the day, they're going to be successful when their end customers are happy.
Yep.
And so it's important to be able to do this effectively. If you want us to go a little bit more specific, of course, feel free to reach out to us and we can go deeper into that question. But I do want to move on to the other questions. So the next one is, we have a paid service in our product that is the majority of our customers dislike, but it drives revenue. How to go about these services?
Maybe like, how do we go about improving these services?
That's how I would read this. Yeah. So,
this is interesting. So,
yeah.
We're working on a product right now inside of Apptentive called Fan Signals, which really kind of helps you determine which of your customers love your app or service, and those that don't are what we call at risk. And you can segment those customers and you can ask them very specific questions. So the ones that love you I think are easiest to say, okay, tell us what you love the best, or help us in ratings and reviews, things like that. Those are things we do really, really well. I think where the power of this is, just targeting those that are at risk, those that say, no, I do not love you. Are they captive? Are they repeat? They every time you ask, it's no. But then it's drilling in. And those drill ins can start with the simple surveys through maybe a few things that you might have an idea of, but then going into asking them for additional feedback in person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I love this question actually, because of two reasons. The first is that obviously you want to, it sounds like if it drives revenue but people don't like it, it usually means that it's a thing that they must do, right?
Captive.
Because captive. I really like that image of, I'm in a box, I can't get out. I have to use this. I think the idea here is to really gather the feedback and start making improvements. And the way to gather the feedback is, there's plenty of different ways to do it. In this webinar, previous webinar, we have a lot of things outlined, but the next step of that is actually measuring it. And that's where I think that fan signals concept is really interesting, that Apptentive is working on, where you can actually see people who previously disliked it, and then see people shifting to actually liking it. And that shift is a good metric for you to be able to find out whether what you're doing is working. But in all essences, it's easier to kind of drop those product features that are musts, like that people have to do when they're captive, because you're like, you know what, it doesn't matter if I make them happy. But it does, because there are plenty, and I have examples in my head of services that I wish that I could drop, and as soon as I could, I then immediately dropped it. And so I would get in front of that ASAP in terms of talking with customers, figuring out what they dislike about it, and figure out how to make their lives easier, even if it's an extremely difficult thing to kind of have that conversation around, because you might have some passionate consumers there.
Great question. Thank you.
Yep. All right. If another team is a kink in the chain, how do you go about partnering with them? How do you overcome one team who does not want to partner or share data? How do you get everyone on board? So I'm assuming this actually comes.
Compound question.
Well, yeah, it's a lot of different things, but also probably a bigger company, bigger team. Because I almost felt, I had a flashback when I started reading this to kind of the bigger companies that I've worked with. I think that's the part of the discovery guide that I think is really interesting. Like a Scrum Master, you're removing impediments, right? And a discovery guide. A good discovery guide is someone who is hopefully able to facilitate and be like, hey, this is the reason why it's so important for us to be able to share this data. There's nothing you can do. You can't strong arm people. And, in the product management world, you have a lot of autonomy, but no authority, right? And so the way you get about it is by convincing people. So showing how important it is to share data for their business, empathizing with what they're trying to accomplish, and being like, hey, you share us what you have, we share you what you have, we both grow together. It gets this culture. And if it's just literally one team that's a kink in the chain, one of the things that I've done at a previous company is just everyone else is doing it and exemplifying why it's important and why their lives are much easier. And then when you approach them, you can be like, hey, everyone else is doing this, and this is extremely important.
Mm-hmm.
It's important for us to be successful across the board, and we can help you. Like, this is going to help you ultimately.
Yeah, I think my take on that question is also just the servant leader mindset.
Yeah.
You have a lot of leaders out there that, and you can tell when a leader is a servant leader or not. And I think the facilitator role of both the Scrum Master is a servant leader, but also the Discovery Guide is a servant leader, could really help make this easier. And it is about serving and helping others. So finding out what those impediments are, what are the blocks, why do they feel that way, and going to lunch with them, taking them out, and then just exploring those. I think that's the best way to do it.
Build the trust.
It is to build the trust. Yeah. You got to build the trust.
It's really important. And just as you said, as simple as taking them out to lunch, that's key. So
yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, that is actually the end of our questions. So thank you so much for your time and for listening. We can continue this convo after the webinar. If you have more questions, either reach out to us. There's a variety of different ways to reach out to us. And you can check out some of our links. We'll be sending some of the different blog resources that we have at the end of this. And yeah.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, everyone, and take care.